He had hit JonBenet.
When was that?
Before the murder, I would have to say it was probably a year and a half.
Although Ramsey photographer and Patsy's longtime friend Judith Phillips doesn't provide more detail than that, a date down to the month flashes on screen at this point. Remember this date, August 1994, because we're going to come back to it later.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Hope you enjoyed the Super Bowl. If you watched it, hope you enjoyed your weekend. Now, I do think when Clemente asked Judith for the date of this incident, the fact that Judith is able to provide a fairly specific answer, that counts in her favor. I mean, it's very likely Patsy and Judith did talk about this incident. And as JonBenet's photographer, it's also likely she'd noticed the scar, ask about it, and Patsy would have to provide some sort of explanation.
She walked up behind me, and about that time he clipped her around the cheek.
Okay.
She screamed bloody murder.
Did you hit your sister with a golf club?
Not on purpose. She was standing behind me and I went like that.
Now you'll notice both Patsy and Judith Phillips role play. They basically show on their own faces where the scar was. Patsy shows it on one cheek, Judith Phillips shows it on the other. And of course, when Burke talks about this, he's got a big smile on his face. In this analysis, I want to deal with how the Ramseys, how Patsy and John dealt with this issue under police questioning.
Worth playing for? Yeah.
Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, I'll be continuing this analysis dealing with the golf club striking incident through the doctor's report, Dr. Booth. So look out for that. For those interested in the O.J. Simpson case, there's a really interesting documentary series on Netflix right now, American Manhunt. It really is worth watching. I've watched a lot of documentaries on the O.J. Simpson case. I've written 3 books, and there's some really interesting new material. It's also presented very well. And so if you'd like to follow me as I cover a parallel series to the JonBenet Ramsey case, please do check out the video that I've already put up. And I'll be putting a couple of more videos up in the coming days. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So as I said, we're going to deal with this issue, this incident with the club, with a golf club, through 2 dimensions, Patsy's account and then John's account. Let's start with Patsy's account. Haney says, okay, there was mention while we were talking about that, there was mention of a situation where Burke apparently hit JonBenet with a golf club up at Charlevoix. Now, bear in mind, this interview took place in 1998. So we are 2 years after, almost 2 years after, the incident itself, JonBenet's death, and the police are asking Patsy about the specific incident. And Patsy says, yes, she does remember. Haney says, could you tell us about that? Patsy, he, meaning Burke, was taking a practice swing. He was just a little guy. Now, first of all, a practice swing, whether you are a child or even an adult, is unlikely to do any damage at all, if you think about it. Think about a practice swing when you're holding a tennis racket. There's almost no power behind a practice swing, especially once it reaches nearly horizontal, which would be the height of JonBenet's eye. At that point, the backswing actually pauses. Now, a backswing from a practice swing is even weaker than from a normal swing. And it's nothing like the front swing that's much harder and faster. It's got much more power behind it. I'm talking about the real thing where you're swinging forward through the ball and you're allowed to swing right through. And then the club comes to a rest sort of by itself. Whereas a backswing, a practice swing, is more of a controlled motion, especially the backward part of it. And so what Patsy seems to be suggesting is that Burke wasn't even deliberately hitting a ball, that he was just practicing, doing a practice swing. The other thing to note is that this apparently happened on the reverse swing of the practice swing, which would make it even less effectual. And so the whole question really is, does this make sense? Is this likely? Is this true? And remember, Burke said that JonBenet came up behind him.
She walked up behind me about that time and clipped her around the cheek.
Okay.
She screamed bloody murder.
Did you hit your sister with a golf club?
Not on purpose. She was standing behind me and I went like that.
Now, if you look at the way Burke role plays it, the way he's holding that club, it should have gone way above JonBenet's head, the way he'd sort of lifted up in the backswing. I don't know about you, but I've played golf and the practice backswing tends to be quite slow and the forward backswing tends to be a lot quicker. But perhaps I'm being a little pedantic. Now, to make this idea more sensible, more approachable, more accessible, imagine that you're about to hit a tennis ball and you first swing back before hitting it. Now, imagine someone walked into that reverse swing. Would it really be likely to cause any injury? Because there's no power, there's very little momentum behind it. Does that make sense? Now, think about that in terms of a golf swing. So is Patsy being honest about this, or was JonBenet actually in front of the golf club when it swung? Because Patsy's wrong about something else. Do you see it? Let's go through the rest of the transcript. So Patsy says he was taking a practice swing, meaning Burke, and Burke, was just a little guy. He was 2 or 3 or 2.5, and it was our first summer there, how young they were there. And Haney says, about what year would that have been? Patsy says, that was 93, I believe. And he was out there with this little wiffle ball, golf balls, and she walked up behind and he kind of clipped her right on the cheek, and she screamed bloody murder. And I jumped down off the porch, and now that part also suggests that Patsy was actually an eyewitness to the incident, that Patsy actually saw it and knew exactly what had happened. And so you'd imagine that Patsy would know, if she saw it happen, she would know exactly which eye it happened to, and that certainly Judith Phillips would know that as well, because Judith Phillips was photographing JonBenet. Now, Patsy says it was 1993, but unless CBS is wrong, wasn't it August 1994? 1993 was also the year Patsy had ovarian cancer. Was Patsy ever in Charlevoix that year? Burke would have been 7 years old then in 1994, not 3.5, unless that's a transcription error. Except Patsy emphasizes, after saying how old Burke was, how young they were, she seems to be emphasizing how young they were, but they weren't that young in 1994. It was barely 17 months prior to the incident. So can you see what's happening here? Patsy's minimizing all of this. Anyway, she goes on to say, I grabbed her and, slammed ice on it. I thought he got her in the eye and went down there to the emergency room and, the doctor looked and it was just, that socket around your eye protects your eye there. So she had a good old black eye for a while. She had a little, I don't remember which eye it was, little abrasion. I took her to a plastic surgeon just to see if there was anything to do to help there. He said it will go away, Now, I want you to think about this. JonBenet gets a serious black eye in one particular eye, and Patsy can't even remember which eye it was. Does that make sense? Patsy can't seem to remember which eye it was, yet in the video of the police statement, she clearly motions towards her right eye. Now, Judith, by inference, does seem to remember. She seems to be referring the viewer to her own left eye. Also, calling it a, quote, little abrasion, isn't that Patsy deliberately minimizing the incident? I mean, I don't think you go to an emergency room immediately after an incident like that over a little abrasion, or to a plastic surgeon with an injury to your face because of a little abrasion. And an injury to the eye socket it's a really delicate area of the body, especially when you're dealing with a young child. JonBenet could have actually lost her sight in that particular eye. And so the key question here is whether this was an accident or something else, which is why I think Haney explicitly asks Patsy this. Haney says, so that was just an accidental. Patsy says, yeah. She actually interrupts him. Yeah, he wasn't used to looking around, and she walked right up behind him. So, Haney, yeah, okay. Also, do you notice Patsy doesn't provide the doctor's details when she's asked? Patsy has notepads, writes lists. She's a stickler for details. She's had cancer treatments herself. She remembers that Burke was playing with wiffle balls, right? Isn't it likely that she remembered the doctor given such a memorable incident? Anyway, DeMuth says, and who was the doctor? Patsy. Oh, somebody there at the emergency room in Charlevoix. Haney. And that's one of the things we are trying to work some of this in as we go through the photos. Now, it sounds like Haney's saying, you know what, we actually been trying to find this doctor in Charlevoix, and that's why they're asking her. And perhaps they haven't been able to track him down at that point. And then he says, obviously, but have you seen changes in Burke since the incident? And Patsy says, he's grown like a weed. Now, it's interesting that the cops ask for the doctor's name, as they probably want to verify the details independently. And I do wonder if they ever did verify the doctor and whether they were able to verify the details. Of course, if they did, that sort of information would likely be protected through health and privacy laws. Then when she says, have you seen changes in Burke since the incident? That's quite a loaded question. Has Burke's behavior, has Burke's attitude, has Burke's personality, has Burke's feelings towards JonBenet, has there been any kind of thing going on with Burke, any issues going on with Burke since that particular incident? And it's an interesting question. Patsy seems to dodge it in the beginning. She says, well, he's grown like a weed. It's not really addressing the question. But then she admits that he's become more cautious with his sister. And I know as children, my brother and I, we were often admonished to be more gentle with our baby sister as well. So the question is, was this just an ordinary sibling dynamic, or is there more to it than that? And that then brings us to number 2, John's account. Now let's deal with John Ramsey's account of the same incident. He apparently said she got clobbered, and then adds it was a pure accident. Now if you think about those first 3 words, she got clobbered, isn't that another way of saying what actually happened to JonBenet when she died, on the day that she died? Because she did get clobbered. And the word John uses, clobbered, it doesn't sound, at least not to me, that JonBenet got clipped from behind. Compare the 2 words clipped, which Patsy uses, and clobbered, which John uses. If you had to match one with being hit in front and one with being hit behind, how would you match them? John, interestingly, has the incident happening either from the front or the back. And let's face it, there is a difference. If it is from the back, it was more likely to be an accident. And as we've heard, Patsy and Burke seem to say that it was from the back and it was an accident. But it's also more likely to have been a harmless clip if it is from the back. If it is from the front, then it was not likely to be an accident. Anyway, Mike Cain says to John, okay, from what I've read, JonBenet had an injury at one time to her face. Now, Mike Cain was the prosecutor that was part of the whole grand jury investigation in mid-1998. In mid-1998, after 18 months of police investigation, the prosecutor is asking John about this question. He's asking John, from what I've read, JonBenet had an injury to her face. What do you know about that? And John says, Burke did it. Burke was up at the lake, and Burke was in the yard swinging a golf club, and she walked up either in front of him or behind him. And then he adds, I was not there, and she got clobbered. It was a pure accident. Then Cain says, where did you hear about that? John says, oh, Patsy called me. Cain, you were out of town? John, yes. Now, it's also interesting that John admits he wasn't around then either. And it seems shortly after this incident, Burke got a black eye as well. And John describes it as follows. Yes, Burke was part of the league that he was in, a practice or a game. Mike Cain, you weren't there? John, no. Cain, where did you hear about it? Patsy told me. So it's the same thing. John wasn't there. Patsy told him what had happened. Kane. I guess this was another. Burke went to school after this, had a black eye. Do you know anything about that? John says, there's a picture of him in his baseball uniform with a real shine, and he had gotten a black eye playing baseball. He was a fielder, and I got it, clunk. Kane says, oh, was that during a game? John Ramsey says, yeah. Kane says, as part of, and then, yeah. So one also would want to know, was this verified as well, this claim? And you would imagine it would be easy to do with Burke's friends and other parents. Now, I think one's also got to ask, why was Patsy by herself at the lake during the summer of 1996? Because when Steve Thomas says, you had previously broken the basement window to gain entry to the home when you'd been locked out. When was that? And John says, well, I think that was last summer, because Patsy was up at the lake all summer, and it would have been July or August probably, somewhere in that time frame. So you kind of get the sense of these parents being separated from one another, certainly at this time of the year. So what can we take out of this information? Well, more than you might think. Number one, we're going to look at 3 insights. Number one, the golf club broke the skin and it left a scar, right? So this is also why the blow to the head 17 months later on Christmas night, that's why that wasn't made with a golf club, because it didn't break the skin and didn't leave a scar. And one thing that I think Patsy doesn't mention is the likelihood that there was blood left by this injury to her face. And I mean, when she says JonBenet screamed bloody murder, well, there's the word bloody there. Number 2, did it happen on or close to JonBenet's birthday? And this, I think, is a very interesting question, because on CBS they show that the date of this incident was August 1994. Well, JonBenet's birthday is in August, specifically August 6. Is there any footage of JonBenet's 4th birthday in Charlevoix? And then number 3, both John and Patsy minimized the issue, even though JonBenet likely required emergency medical treatment. She could even have lost her eye. And then there's also the fact that she possibly needed plastic surgery because it's an injury to her face. And think about it, she's a beauty queen. She can't really afford to have an injury there, right? And then Burke Ramsey also minimizes the issue. I mean, he laughs about it when he's interviewed on Dr. Phil. And this minimizing of the issue, like the bedwetting, it could be how issues, if there were any, persisted and got worse, if you really think about it. Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. In the next episode, we want to look at Dr. Buth's response, JonBenet's doctor, to this particular injury, as well as other medical records we have regarding JonBenet Ramsey. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.